Hey guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to go ahead and create a checkbox radio buttons component, and we're going to include labels in there as well. So the first thing that you need to do anytime you're basically getting started with this is you need to figure out if you need to create a base component, right? So for the base component, I'm just going to go ahead and create our checkbox. So I'm going to say that we're going to have a checkbox by default that is going to be 20 pixels in size. The stroke can be neutral, 50 maybe, and the border radius is going to be 4. We're going to have a checkbox inside of it, or check icon that already exists in the library, so I'm just going to reduce it in size. One thing that I want to do is I want to actually scale it properly, so the border radius, so the border for the icon also scales properly. So now we have our icon here. I'm going to say this is going to be white by default, and in this case we're just going to have, I'm just going to go ahead and say this is going to be our checkbox off, and this one is going to be checkbox on. And let's just go ahead and create these components. The fill on this obviously is going to be our primary color, which is going to be primary 300. I'm going to remove the border, and here we have our checkbox component created. We obviously want to do the same thing for the radio, so I'm just going to say that I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to say everything is going to, well, first of all, I actually need to create a new property. I'm going to say this is going to be our type, and the type by default is going to be checkbox. Let's just go ahead and include it above, and the property here is going to be active. So whether it's active or not, in this case it's off, in this case it's on. Let's just go ahead and duplicate this. I'm going to say this is going to be our radio button, or maybe just radio. Yeah, maybe radio button or radio button like this. And instead of obviously this check, I'm going to remove the check, and I just want to include, let's say, an item like this. I obviously want to increase the border radius here and probably reduce this to 8 pixels. Similarly, I'm going to go here. I'm going to say paste and replace. So here we have the item, and I basically want to say that these are going to be white. So now we have our checkbox and radio button base component created. I'm basically just going to press underscore here, and I'm going to say checkbox underscore radio, because we don't want this exported. We're actually going to create a larger component that's going to include a lot of things here. So let's just go ahead and do that now. I'm basically going to go ahead and drag this checkbox, and I'm going to say this is going to be our checkbox label. I'm going to rename this item here on the left to say checkbox label. I'm going to create an auto layout here. The spacing in between these can be 8. The font size for this is fine, small. And since we're using the small font size, let's just go ahead and say this is also going to be small. So this is going to be our checkbox slash small variation. And in this small variation, we also want to go ahead, first of all, obviously click the plus icon to create a variant. And in this variant, we want to say that this is going to be, let's say, this is small, this is also small. And now we want to go ahead and add multiple properties to it. So the first property is going to be, well, actually the first property is going to be type, which is going to be checkbox by default. I'm going to move it above. Then I'm going to create another property that's going to say whether the checkbox is active, obviously. So it's going to be off by default, or the radio button is off by default. And then I'm going to add another property which is going to say label, and I'm going to keep the label on by default. Okay. So those are the things that I want to do. And in this particular case, I'm going to say the checkbox is going to be on. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say the active state is also going to be on as well. So here we have our first instance, our first size of checkbox created. I also want to go ahead and basically duplicate this and say that in these both cases, the label is going to be off and everything is just going to be the same. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say hide these. So here we basically have our component created for the small variation for the checkbox. Now we want to basically duplicate this for the medium variation and the large variation, right? So I'm basically just going to select all of them. I'm going to duplicate them maybe with a spacing of 32. And I'm going to say this is going to be the medium size for the checkbox. And I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to say all of these checkboxes inside will actually be scaled to 24 pixel. And the label is actually going to be reduced or increased to the base font size because it's medium, and it's going to look like this. And the spacing in between all of these is actually going to be 10, Though I didn't need to give the spacing or change the spacing here since the checkbox isn't really visible, but still, I just went ahead and did that. Now I'm just going to select all of these. Just maybe I think the spacing can actually be increased. So maybe the spacing in between these elements is going to be 64. And this is just for visual purposes, so I can differentiate these components. And I'm now going to go ahead and I'm going to say that all of these items need to be at the bottom. So the small variation is at the top, the medium on the left is at the bottom, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say that all of these now are going to be large. And in this large case, or in this large size, I want to say all of these checkboxes need to be scaled to maybe 32 pixels, right? Since we're following the 8 pixel grid after the 24 pixel mark. So I'm just going to give some spacing in between these. I'm going to say align to the bottom, or maybe, yeah, to the bottom is fine. Just going to give the spacing. But actually, I don't need to give it like that. I can give it in another way as well. So now I'm going to say that the font size here is actually going to be increased to the large variation, since this is the large variation, and the spacing in between these elements is going to be 12. So now that that's done, we have our checkbox component created. Now I want to go to the quantizer plugin, and I want to say that maybe I can say this, that we're going to have 3 columns, and the column gap here is going to be 800, and the row gap, sorry, not 880, and the row gap can be maybe 24. Now as you can see, we have that done. It doesn't look completely ideal, but we can work with this. So now that the checkboxes component is done, you basically just want to press enter, select all of these and duplicate them. So now that I've duplicated them, I just want to go ahead and move everything, all of my selections at the bottom. And I want to say these are going to be radios. So now that we have the radios, the only thing that we need to do is we need to replace all of these checkboxes that are living inside to radio buttons. Now I can individually go and select all of these and say these are going to be radio buttons. I can do that. But one other way of doing the same thing is using the plugin Find and Focus. And I'm going to say I want to limit it to the selection that I have. And I want to say I want to find the checkbox underscore radio, because that's the component, our larger component that we're using inside of it. So once I find that, as you can see, by default, all of these are automatically selected inside of them. And I just want to say all of these are just going to be radio buttons. And here we have all of our the larger component created. I can just go ahead and show it to you. So I'm just going to include it here. As you can see, we have the radio, we have the checkbox, we have the different sizes. I can go ahead and activate it. I can remove the label. I can again say this is going to be a radio, and we basically have all of these controls present within this component, where once we actually export this library, we would not be exporting this one because we have an underscore behind it or appended or prepended to it. Only this component will be exported, and we don't even need this one, right? This one is just in case. Imagine you wanted to have this circle that's living inside all of the radio buttons to be slightly larger, maybe something like this, right? Now everything is going to be updated immediately, or maybe you wanted it smaller. That can also be done from a single location. If you did not include the single component as an instance in this larger component, you would have to do it manually, right? Go here, go here, go here, and change the border radius, stuff along those lines. And that's just going to be a lot of time wasted in the future for any changes that you want to make. So that's going to be pretty much it for this video. Do subscribe, do hit the bell icon, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.